Hello, my name is Russell Holtz, and I'm pleased to present to you my simulator lessons for Condor 2. These lessons are optimized for use with a Mach 0.1 simulated glider cockpit, but can be adapted for use with any Condor 2 setup. This package consists of 3 parts: the lesson files for Condor 2 Flight School, a student progress record, which includes the reading that should be done in my textbooks before starting a module, and an instructor guide. The lessons are divided into 9 modules, and each lesson consists of 1 or more scenarios. This allows me to break each maneuver down into smaller pieces so that the student only has to learn 1 new skill at a time. The modules are Basic Flight Controls, Landings, Glide Slope Control and Patterns, Takeoff and Tow, Crosswinds, Stall and Spin Recovery, Rope Brakes, Emergency and Unusual Procedures, and Flying in Lift. The first 4 modules should be done in order as they build on the skills learned in the previous module. The next modules can be done in any order. I've also included some additional flight scenarios that can be used to help the student improve their flight skills, practice various emergency procedures, and develop situational awareness, planning, and decision-making skills. Once installed, the lessons can be found in the Flight School portion of Condor 2 under the Basics tab. The additional flight scenarios can be found under the Intermediate tab. Each scenario includes a brief description about what the student is expected to accomplish. This description isn't meant as instruction on how to fly the maneuver. That information is given in the Flight Training Manual for Gliders. Most of the scenarios have demonstrations that the student can watch to see the proper way to fly the maneuver. You can see the demonstration by clicking the View Lesson button, or try the lesson yourself by clicking on Try Lesson. The instructor guide includes the descriptions given in the lesson, along with notes that point out actions that the instructor should take to help the student master the lesson. This can be very useful for instructors who've not previously used simulators for training. Now I'm going to describe the progression of the lessons through the first 4 modules. Module 1 is all about teaching the student how to control the glider in straight flight and in turns. The first lesson introduces the student to Condor, to the controls and their effects, and how to read the instruments. Next, the student will practice controlling the pitch and trimming the glider. Then the student will learn how to perform coordinated turns. Having the turn point posts in the background helps the student see clearly when the nose swings when rolling into or out of a turn. Now that the student can control the pitch, trim the glider, and coordinate the ailerons and rudder, they're challenged to fly on a constant heading in conditions that will require that they make frequent control corrections. Each scenario in this lesson has more turbulence than the previous one. Next, the student is told to fly through the turn point poles. They get practice at coordinating their turns and also get to practice establishing and holding a heading. The first scenario requires only gentle turns, with the second one requiring more aggressive turns. The final lesson in this module prepares the students to do the 90-degree turns required in the pattern, as they fly through 4 turn points arranged in a square. Module 2 teaches the student the skills they'll need to perform a landing. First, the student learns how to keep the airspeed of the glider constant when using different air brake settings, and is introduced to the concept of searching for the half air brake glide slope. Next, the student practices flying along a straight line to simulate lining up with the runway, but without the pressure of an imminent landing. Again, with each subsequent scenario, the turbulence increases to challenge the student. As all instructors know, the success of the student's first landing is almost always followed by the failure of the student to be able to control the glider during the rollout. One of the many advantages of the simulator is that the student can practice taxiing the glider before they land, so that when they do land, they're set up to succeed rather than fail. This next lesson is one of my favorites. It teaches the student that the glider lands when it's ready and shouldn't be forced onto the ground. I challenge the student to make it to the post at the far end of the runway without touching down. The scenario is set up so that isn't possible, but in trying, the student will hold the glider off as long as possible and will naturally perform a nice low-energy landing. Now that the student knows how to fly along a straight line, control the airspeed with the air brakes open, fly the hold off, and taxi the glider, it's time to teach the landing. With all the other skills learned, the only new thing the student has to do in this lesson is transition from the final to the hold-off. The goal of Module 3 is to teach the student how to fly a pattern, adjusting the glide slope so that they arrive at a specific aim point with the desired airspeed. They start out by learning how to adjust the air brakes on final to intercept the half air brake glide slope to the aim point. Then they do the same thing, but this time starting out on the base leg. Next, they learn how to perform precision landings by flying to the aim point, holding the glider in the air until after the touchdown point, and then getting the glider stopped by the stop point. And finally, now that they have all the required skills, they're taught to fly the entire pattern. Module 4 finishes up teaching the basic skills to the student by introducing the takeoff and the tow. The student now knows how to taxi the glider, which is the first part of the takeoff, and how to do a hold-off, which is the second part. So the only new skill the student has to learn in this first lesson is how to follow the tow plane. To hone the student's towing skills, boxing the wake is introduced next, followed by the tow signals. The last lesson in this module brings everything together. The student will do some pattern tows, completing an entire flight from takeoff to landing. I'm now just going to give a quick overview of the materials covered in the remaining modules 5 through 9. Module 5 is all about dealing with crosswinds. First, the student learns how to track along a line using a crab. Then the student is taught how to transition from the crab into a slip. Now that they know how to crab and slip, the student is placed on final and will perform a few crosswind landings. Then the student learns how to apply crab angles in the pattern to adjust for crosswinds. And finally, the student practices some crosswind takeoffs. Stall and spin recognition and recovery is the topic of Module 6. First, the student learns to recognize and recover from a stall in straight flight. The student is then faced with some challenges, which require them to stay above boxes outlined by these yellow lines. This gets them to concentrate on a goal while forcing them into situations where the glider will stall. This teaches the student that no matter what their goal is, staying in control of the glider is always the top priority. The next lesson deals with stalling on final with the air brakes open. And then the student learns to deal with deep stalls. In the turning stalls lesson, the student is challenged to fly around as many of the turn points as possible without descending into the yellow box. Again, the student must learn that controlling the glider is more important than any other goal. And finally, the student learns how to enter and recover from a spin. Module 7 introduces the student to premature termination of the tow, or rope brakes. First, the student practices an off-field landing, since these may be required if the rope breaks below 200 feet. Next, downwind landings are practiced, which the student will need to do if the rope breaks between 200 and 400 feet. Then, the rope break planning and calls are introduced and practiced. Finally, there are lessons that demonstrate and let the student practice dealing with rope breaks at 20, 100, 200, and 400 feet. Module 8 deals with emergencies or other unusual occurrences. First, the student is taught how to perform a forward slip, which can be used if they end up way too high on final or if the air brakes fail closed. Then the student practices using the forward slip to land. Then the student practices a full air brake pattern to simulate what they would do if the air brakes open but fail to close. The student is then exposed to a series of unusual patterns, where the scenario starts with the glider low and not in a normal place in the pattern. These give the student experience at evaluating the situation, making a plan and perhaps an alternate, and then executing the plan. The student then learns to deal with an off-field landing where there's an obstacle that must be cleared. The last lesson in this module is a high wind pattern and landing. Module 9 is all about flying in lift. First, the student learns how to fly consistent circles that are necessary for efficient thermaling. Then, rapid speed changes are practiced, which the student might need to do when entering and exiting thermals, as well as steep climbing turns or chandelles that can be used to enter a thermal from a high cruising speed. And finally, the student gets to practice working thermals, flying in wave, and climbing in ridge lift. To get started using these lessons with your students, download the Flight School file, the Student Progress Record, and the Instructor's Guide in the following section.